Hello YouTube, this is Sam from Talk to Schooling, and in this session of the video we're going to specially talk about the fatty acids and the types of fatty acids. Especially this is about the types of the fatty acids. So the fatty acids are actually are derived from the lipids. So they are the one of the branches of the derived lipids. The fatty acids are derived from the lipids. So we can say that lipids, when hydrolyzed, they give actually the fatty acids and alcohol. So they are the main important, backbone. The fatty acid, the backbone of the lipids. So the fatty acid is actually, we're going to understand what is fatty acid. So fatty acid is what I call a carboxylic acid. What is a carboxylic acid? A carboxylic acid consists of an alcohol group and a carboxyl group. What is carboxyl? When you see this one, COO, it's called the carboxyl part of a group, and this is an alcohol. When they join together, you must have learned this in a basic chemistry, that when they join together, they form a carboxylic acid, and there is a carbon chain going on there. So fatty acid is actually an organic acid, which is a carboxylic acid, which consists of a hydrocarbon chain. This is the carbon, and which contains hydrogen, so that's why we call it the hydrocarbon chain. And a terminal, this is the terminal part, the carboxyl group, especially any of these occurring, esters and in fats and oils. So let's redefine our definition regarding the fatty acid. In another way, we would say that a fatty acid may be defined as an organic acid that occur in natural triglyceride and is a mono. Remember that there's always one carboxylic acid in fatty acid, not more than one, because if there is another carboxylic acid, we won't include it into the fat. So there is only one carboxylic acid. That's why we're adding in definition, and is a monocarboxylic acid ranging in chain length from C4 to carbon C24. And this fatty acid is actually derived from the hydrolysis, or that's why we say the obtained from the hydrolysis of fats. So we have few examples regarding fatty acid. This is the butyric acid, which means it consists of 4 carbon. So how the number of the carbon number actually starts from this, the carboxylic acid group always start from here. So it is C1, C2, C3, C4. For example, we have another example, that is the caproic acid, which is also a fatty acid. In this case, we have C5H11 and COOH. It means it totally consists of 6 carbons, including this one, which is in the carboxylic acid and in the carboxylic acid group. So alright, if you break it down into this condition, it will be C1 to C6. Get the idea? Alright, now let's move to and talk about the types of the fatty acids. So actually, if somebody asks you in brief, in simple way, what are the types of fatty acids, you would be simply replying to them that the fatty acids are actually divided into the saturated and unsaturated fatty acids. But if somebody is going to argue and ask you in detail, then you should define the fatty acid into these types. Straight chain, branched chain fatty acids, substituted fatty acids, cyclic fatty acid, and ecosonides. Alright, in these 5 branches, let's just start from our the number one point, the number one type of the fatty acid, that is the straight chain fatty acid. So what does straight chain fatty acid mean? So that the carbon chain which is forming beside the carboxylic group, which is going in a straight chain, alright? So that straight chain fatty acid is actually divided into the saturated fatty acids and the unsaturated fatty acids. So what we mean actually by the saturated fatty acid, that those which contain no double bonds. There are no double bonds in the saturated fatty acids, and we have a general formula regarding the saturated fatty acid, that is CnH2n plus 1 COOH. But in case of unsaturated fatty acids, we have the double bond. So what is the logic over here? And what we mean by the word saturated and unsaturated. Saturated means it covers all the empty spaces. For example, this is the carbon, and it has carbon again. You see that? So which means the carbon can make 4 bonds. So this carbon occupies all the 4 bonds with a single bond. Like there are no double bond. Like occupying every place is occupied by a single atom. So in the case of double bond, the 2 carbons, that are 2 atoms, are actually wasting their 2 electrons, 2 electrons of each atom. So in here they are not wasting 2 electrons, actually wasting 1 electron and helping the other and forming a bond with them. So that's why we call it the saturated, means all sides are full. But in case of unsaturated, all sides are full, but one is extra full, which means it's all sides. There could be a 4th side, but which is not here. So that's why we call it the unsaturated fatty acid. In other sense, in the other logical way, we can also see it in saturated, which means it's like fat, or you have seen the solid fat. But in unsaturated, it's not that much solid, and that's why the saturated fatty acids are like that. And now we have got few examples regarding the palmitic acid and the stearic acid. So the palmitic acid, which actually contains the 15 carbon chain and a carboxylic group, so which means it actually implies this formula, that is, it's under the 24 and greater than the carbon number 4. And in the stearic acid, which is actually consists of the 17 carbon chain. These are the examples of the saturated fatty acid, and the saturated fatty acid is further divided into the lower fatty acids and the higher fatty acids. So what does we mean by them? So saturated fatty acids having 10 carbon or less, get it? Saturated fatty acids having 10 carbon or less number of carbon atoms are called as lower fatty acids, which means less than 10 or 10 carbon atoms, we call it a lower fatty acid. We have got an example of the acetic acid in this condition, and also we have the caproic acid in the case of the lower fatty acids, anything that is less than the 10. And in case of the higher fatty acids, example palmitic acid, stearic acid, or we have which contain more than 10 carbon atoms, are called the higher fatty acids. So this is all about the saturated fatty acid. Now let's move to the unsaturated. We have also talked about that they have got double bond in their structure. So we divide these both into the mono unsaturated fatty acids and the poly unsaturated fatty acids. First talk about the mono unsaturated fatty acids. So we can also call it as the monoethanoid fatty acids. So actually they contain 1 double bond. That's why we call it mono. Unsaturated means unsaturated, they have double bond, and fatty acids. So they have 1 fatty acids. And their general formula, which I have written here, is CN2H2N minus 1 COOH. And we have an example of oleic, which is called the oleic acid, which is C17H32 COOH, which is actually found nearly all fats. It's found in nearly all fats, and it has another formula. We can put it like this, and I will explain this formula in later videos in detail. But let me tell you that 18 to 9. What does this mean? That it has 18 carbons overall, including the carboxylic acid, because this C17 shows the carbon chain, and the carbon is shown separately from this carbon. So that's why we call the 18 number shows that it have got 18 carbon, the whole acid. And the double bond, I'm sorry, it's not 2, it's 1. It's actually 1. 18, we have got 1 single bond. Number 1 shows there's a single bond at the location between 9 and 10. Always think if there's 9, it means that it's between 9 and 10. Go above there. 9 and 10, between 9 and 10 there is a double bond. This is all about the mono unsaturated fatty acid. Now let's talk about the poly unsaturated fatty acid. So poly unsaturated fatty acids, also called the polyethanoid fatty acids. So in this condition, we have actually 3 polyunsaturated fatty acids of biological importance. They have a really great biological importance. If you are a medical student, you will study it later, that what are more important regarding what are the more important things regarding these acids. So we have got three important acids, that is linoleic acid, linolenic acid, and arachidonic acids. So starting from the linoleic acid, we have a general formula which is used for the acids to define fatty acids, which is 18, 2, 9, and 12. What does this mean? I explain it later. In another video, I'm going to explain the whole formula, the nomenclature, how we bring it. But for the sake of understanding, I may just make it clear that 18, this is a formula for the linoleic acid. So 18 represent that there are 18 carbon. It's made up of 18 carbon, including the carboxylic acid. And the number 2 shows that it has 2 bonds. Double bond. Number 2 shows double bond. 9 shows that there is a double bond between 9 and 10, and 12 shows there is a double bond between 12 and 13. So we've got 18 carbon, consists of 18 carbon. It has double bond and double bond between 9 and 10 and 12 and 13. That's it. And one thing more to add up in this condition, that we have the diet. If you are discussing about the dietary sources of the linoleic acid, we could say, linoleic acid, I'm sorry. We could say that linoleic acid is present in sufficient amounts in peanut oil, corn oil, and the egg yolk. That's why I made a picture of the egg yolk over here. You can see not whole egg, it's present in egg yolk as well. That's I made. Make it clear. Now moving to the linolenic acid. So linolenic acid actually has a formula that is 18, 3, 9, 12, 15. So you pretty get what I mean here. So 18 means it contains of 18 carbons, including the carboxylic acid carbon, the group. 3 shows the number of bonds. There are 3 bonds. Where they are located? Between 9 and 10, 12 and 13, 15 and 16. That's it. This is very easy idea to grab, and if somebody shows you this formula, it's clearly understandable that it is the linolenic acid. So it actually contains 3 bonds discussed earlier between 9 and 10, 12 and 13, and 15 and 16. So there's a general formula which I haven't written here, but if you want to know, it's CnH2n minus 5 COOH. And now let's talk about the dietary sources of this. So this is actually found frequently in with the linoleic acid. And the one thing more that I have to tell you about is that it's also found in the soybean oil, and fish viscera. That's why I have drawn this fish. So it's also found in the fish viscera and liver oil, which is also called as cod liver oil. Cod is actually a fish in which in their liver this acid is found. Now let's talk about the last but not the least. It's called the Arkadiene acid. So the Arkadiene acid has got this formula, pretty easy to understand if you understood all those. 20 made up of 20 carbons. Number of double bonds. There are 4 double bonds between 5 and 10, 5 and 6, 8 and 9, 11 and 12. 14 and 15. Very easy, very understandable, not a big deal. So this if you're talking about the dietary sources of this Arkadiene acid, we have got it's also found in small quantities with linoleic acid and linolenic acid, but particularly found present in peanut oil. You can particularly, if you want looking for the Arkadiene acid, you can easily say, if teacher asks you what acid we find in peanut, what are you going to say? You're going to say that Arkadiene acid. So this is all about the straight chain fatty acid, not a big deal. Straight chain fatty acid divided into the saturated and unsaturated fatty acid. Saturated fatty acid divided into lower fatty acid and higher fatty acids. And unsaturated fatty acids, which means no double bond, divided into monounsaturated means 1. Polyunsaturated means fatty acids means more than 1. We have got 3 best examples. That's it. Not go in detail. Linoleic acid, linolenic acid, and Arkadiene acid. Remember them by this picture where they are located. Linoleic acid, you can put it in the egg yolk. Linolenic acid, you can put in the fish liver or the cod fish liver, you can say. But Arkadiene acid, you're going to put it in the peanut oil. So this is all about this basic idea. But and if you're moving to this side of the diagram, are other branches which are not the main branches, or we can say for the easy to understand, we made these branches. So we have to understand there are more easier than this one in concept understanding. So the branched chain fatty acid, the word itself explains that the fatty acid chain is actually branched. So the branched chain fatty acids could be odd and even carbon chain fatty acids. They actually occur in plant lipids and animal lipids. But what is not defined in majority of books, that it's actually located in the prokaryotic cells, in the small cells, in the the cells which are not visible to our eyes. All right, especially in the prokaryotic cells, these branched chain fatty acids are located. But in human or in other organisms, they are also in animals. They are also present. For example, we have an example of sebaceous gland. In sebaceous gland we have sebum. Sebaceous gland means those oil-producing glands in your skin, in your body. So those glands produce sebum, which is oil, and which actually contains the branched chain fatty acids. So we have another example that is of the branched chain fatty acid is the phytanic acid, which is present in butter. That's it. Branched chain, remember this one, branched chain, butter, butter, branched chain, fatty acid, phytanic acid. Easy to grab idea. Not much detail about it, the branched chain fatty acid. Now let's move toward the substituted fatty acid. Substituted fatty acid is actually not a branched, but for the sake of understanding, we made it in the branch series. So substituted fatty acids means they are substitute of what? It could be substitute of the saturated fatty acids or unsaturated fatty acids. What does substitution mean? If you don't know what a substitution means, I'm going to first explain what is substitution. You might heard in the classes that there is a substitute teacher. Means that if the teacher of any subject doesn't attend the class, another teacher have to replace him. So something is replaced. Substitution means replacement. Substitution, I would rather say replacement. All right, or just say that, replacement. So what happens in the substituted fatty acid? Either the hydroxy group, which is OH, or the methyl group, which is CH3, substitute or replace any hydrogen bond or any hydrogen from the carbon chain. In this case, all right. So how we can define this thing? So substituted fatty acids, in here we have got the hydroxy fatty acids and the methyl fatty acids. So what happens in this case? One or more of the hydrogen atoms have been replaced by what? By OH group. In which? In hydroxy fatty acid. But in case of methyl, we have the replacement of the CH3 group. So both saturated and unsaturated hydroxy fatty acids, particularly with long chains, are found in nature. For example, we have few examples over here. We have got subronic acid, which is found in the brain glycolipids. And also we have another I'm sorry for this one, but Linoleic acid. I'm sorry for my pronunciation, but I'm sure that it could be Linoleic acid. All right, which is also the hydroxy fatty acid. Don't put it in the methyl fatty acid. Just keep it here in the hydroxy fatty acids. Now let's move towards the cyclic fatty acid, which is also a branch. But this thing is not that much explained anywhere, because only a few compounds of the cyclic fatty acids are found in nature. So the cyclic fatty acid, bearing cyclic groups are present in, the whole fatty acid is not cyclic. Don't say that. Never say that. But it could be possibly something like this. Then there's a COH group on one side, and there's a carbon chain going between carbon. And in the end, we might have, like this, there's a chain. So that's why we call it the cyclic fatty acids. We have a cyclic, I would rather say, cyclic chain on the end of the whole fatty acid. So that's why we're going to call it the cyclic fatty acids. So in the cyclic fatty acids, we have got the coulomogric acid, which is actually obtained from the coulomogra, and the hydrocarpic acid. So this is all about regarding the cyclic fatty acid, not that much detail. But the eicosanoids, these are actually derived from the eicosapolenoic fatty acids. So what are the eicosanoids? They are actually the signaling molecules which the compound itself, the fatty acid itself, is actually made up of the 20 carbon. There's actually a series of these fatty acids. So there's also a classification of this one, but we are not concerned with that classification because this is not present in majority of the courses, so you don't have to go through this one. But this classification is very important, but you must have an idea of these classifications as well. So this is all about today's lecture. I hope I cleared a lot of ideas regarding the types of fatty acids and how we could differentiate between them. And our next lecture would be about the nomenclature of the fatty acids, where I would explain that why we use this formula that is over here, that is 24. What does this mean and why we add that? And again, we're also going to talk about the isomerism and the essential fatty acids in our coming videos. So please stay tuned and keep visiting Tiger Schooling. Thank you.